Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're located today. And welcome to another edition of Denton's Global Smart Cities and Connected Communities think tank. Our topic today is transactive energy, and we have an amazing panel of 4 industry leaders to teach us about this breakthrough topic. My name's Clint Vince, and I chair Denton's U.S. energy practice. And together with my teammate, Emma Hand, co-chair our 1,200-member global energy sector for the U.S. region. Emma and I also co-chair this think tank, which has now grown to more than 750 thought leaders from around the globe. Our dear friends at the Keystone Policy Center are here again to co-sponsor today's roundtable, and it's as part of their Key Conversations program. And the spectacular CEO of Keystone, Christine Scanlon, is going to give us our welcome.
Thank you
Christine.
so much. Thank you so much, Clint. I really appreciate the kind introduction. And I'm calling in this morning from Denver, where we're having a beautiful day. Again, thanks to Denton's for pulling these amazing topics with such outstanding panelists together. It really, my learning has gone deeply as you've done these now for quite a while, Clint. So I'm very appreciative as in representing my organization. We've worked in energy policy for the better part of 30 years. So these topics are particularly of interest to our organization as we work to find innovative solutions to interesting issues and interesting policy questions. So this panel is amazing, and I can't believe you assembled such great minds. So we really appreciate being a part of this with you, Clint, and Denton's and the whole team. So thank you. I'm looking forward to listening in.
Thank you, Christine. And I know you've got some obligations with the Denver or Colorado Chamber of Commerce today. So we know you'll need at some point to lead, but you definitely have the best backdrop of any of our.
That's our dome. That's a picture of the dome in Denver, the state capitol. I think so too. It's pretty remarkable. Yeah, thank you. I'll hang on as much as I can. I really appreciate it.
Let me call on one of the rising stars in our energy practice, Andrew Mina, to introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Clint, and good morning, everyone. I'm Andrew Mina, Senior Managing Associate in Denton's Energy Practice Group, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's Smart Cities and Connected Communities Roundtable, Emerging Issues in Transactive Energy. We are extremely excited to have an incredible panel of some of our nation's foremost thought leaders to discuss emerging trends and issues associated with the changing energy landscape being brought on by transactive energy. And while there are varying definitions of transactive energy, which we will discuss today, one thing is for certain: transactive energy is challenging our traditional understanding of how electricity can be generated, stored, transmitted, and distributed. While transactive energy holds great promise, there are many issues that must be addressed and resolved before a shift to a truly transactive energy system can take place. Joining us today to explore these important issues are Morgan O'Brien, Executive Chairman of the Board at Anterix, Jeff Weiss, Co-founder and Executive Chairman at Distributed Sun, Larissa Dobriansky, Chief Business and Regulatory Innovations Officer at General Microgrids, and Brian Keene, President at Smart Power Inc. and Co-founder and CEO at WeGreen. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Clint Vince.
Thank you, Andrew. And Brian, let's start with you. If you can say a few words about smart power and your interest in this field, and also if you could begin by giving us a working definition of transactive energy so that you can set the table for us.
Absolutely. Sure. Well, thanks, Clint, and thanks, Andrew. So I run a not-for-profit organization called Smart Power, which actually I started 21 years ago, really with the focus of trying to educate the American people on clean energy and energy efficiency, how in fact we can become energy smart. And dive right into transactive energy, here we are. Here's the opportunity for us and for everyone to actually be energy smart and to actually be a part of the energy supply chain. So what transactive energy is really simply the opportunity for all of us to buy and sell energy. That may sound confusing and compelling, but think of it currently, homeowners, business owners, just regular people aren't selling their own energy necessarily. In fact, we buy our energy from a utility company. Under transactive energy, we're going to start to be able to do that peer-to-peer and friend-to-friend and into the utility grid itself, into the power grid itself. And let me just say one point also, because I know some folks may be confused and wondering about virtual power plants and VPPs, and is there a difference, or what are we talking about? Virtual power plants are, in essence, a network of suppliers, and that supplier could be a home, it could be a battery, it could be a car, a network that is actually powered, giving energy to each other. And then transactive energy is really the entire system that we're talking about. We're talking about putting energy onto the grid and supplying clean, renewable energy by ourselves for everybody else. So we're not, you don't necessarily need to create a giant solar farm. You could have solar on your house and then sell it into the grid through transactive energy. I'll stop there if that makes any sense.
Thank you, Brian. That's a great intro. I first met Brian many years ago on Llewellyn King's White House Chronicles TV show, where I know Morgan and others have appeared as well. And I've been learning from Brian ever since. Brian, since you've introduced the concept of virtual power plants as a subset of transactive energy, has there been a technological breakthrough that allows these two concepts to develop at this point in time?
Yeah, there have been many. And kind of think about it like this, for 30 years, 40 years, we've been talking about solar power. So people buy solar, they get solar on their roof, they get solar in a solar farm. And when the sun's out, we can get solar in it. And it's been great. But it's not been without its challenges, and specifically kind of the intermittency, if you will, of the sun. Same kind of with wind. The big breakthrough, kind of the holy grail here, is that we now have battery storage for solar power, for wind power. The battery has basically now made it so that no matter how much solar your home creates or your business creates, you can store that power, you can store that energy. And now what we're talking about transactive energy is then saying, hey, since you have that energy sitting next to your house, I'm the utility, could I borrow some of that? Could I buy some of that, actually? The unique thing here is that for the first time, the American consumer is really becoming a prosumer. They're actually becoming part of the energy solution by selling the utility their energy. And battery power really helps make that possible. Then the other pieces, and there are many other pieces, and Andrew had mentioned, it's a big challenge, but communication becomes a huge piece of this thing. How do we get my house to talk to your house, to talk to your car battery, to talk to my solar battery? How does that happen? And by the way, how does the utility keep track of it all? And actually then when they need the power, can they call the power up? So there's a huge number of technological advances. But I would kind of say, to me, it really starts with that battery.
Thank you, Brian. I'm going to want to come back to you in a few minutes on prosumers and develop that idea a little more carefully. And we have Morgan O'Brien, one of the visionaries in telecommunications, to tell us a little bit more about the need of communications to make this all happen. Jeff, you are the co-founder of both Distributed Sun and True Current, and one of the true leaders in this field. Can you tell us a little bit about your companies and why you are dedicated to this concept?
Thank you so much, and thank you, Clint and Denton's and Keystone for including me today. We have two companies. One is Distributed Sun, and the other is True Current. And at Distributed Sun for 15 years, we've been developing solar at scale around the country. And as Brian said, that's becoming an old school technology. It's bankable, it's financeable, it's reliable, it works. but it does what it is supposed to do. Along the way, many organizations started to discover their greenhouse gas emissions more broadly and create goals, perhaps SBTI goals, and perhaps have ESG objectives. And in doing that, it turns out that's all of that alphabet soup is a bit of a mouthful, but it creates a larger set of tasks if you want to accomplish that. So that has led my firm to create True Current, which is the energy transition partner for Fortune 500 companies, because actually deploying and causing there to be the ability to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions requires a lot of management, construction, organization, transactions across the organization, and that's what we're in the middle of doing, which of course goes beyond a solar plant to fleet and facilities and batteries and storage, and then all the software and all the hardware that allows you to transact and interact with that at the enterprise level.
Thank you, Jeff. What are some of the sort of exciting new issues that you're seeing in the clean energy transition?
Well, to me, what's exciting is the concept that we can now be transactive. So we're entirely a business-to-business company, but I'll illustrate it from the point of view of a consumer. So most people have driven a car. In the days of an electric car, even the electric cars have a battery in them. You fill the car with electricity and you drive it and it runs down, and then you have to stop and fill it with electricity. So the metaphor of that is similar to the metaphor of gasoline in a gas station. It's just a different form of power. Soon upon us, we're going to have bidirectional use of that battery. So you can, which is all about the transactive thing. Brian was talking about buying and selling energy. No one thinks of selling energy from their car typically, but most people, it turns out, don't use their car 24 hours a day. And when they're not using their car, even if they're using it to commute, it tends to sit and idle. So wouldn't it be great to have an app on your phone that offers you the opportunity with different prices at different times of day to discharge your battery and to discharge it partially or fully? And imagine if you were going on vacation and you could just say, oh, I'll just allow the grid to take my power, and your car becomes a distributed energy resource. So that, as a prosumer perspective, it's a very tangible example of what's so exciting. Obviously, to implement that requires, as everything does in the landscape that we all work in, the combination of technology, policy, and capital, right? In that case, the capital is somewhat ancillary because the person's already purchased the car, but the policy environment needs to allow the bidirectional sale of those electrons. So what's exciting is we're now starting to talk about policy changes to enable buying and selling, and not just one direction, because the macro energy system we live in and use is still a 20th century system. It's still a hub and spoke system, and it's still built on a regulatory framework which isn't designed for and doesn't support the smart transactive technologies we now have. So we've got to bring it up to speed, and we'll get tremendous efficiencies in the economy out of that, which is very exciting.
Thank you, Jeff. Can you give us a really quick definition of distributed energy resources for those not familiar with that term?
Sure, thank you. So again, the traditional energy system is a hub and spoke system. Everyone's heard of nuclear power plants and coal plants and natural gas for electricity, et cetera. And generally speaking, those plants are physically large. They require a lot of capital. So that the energy system of that supplies most of what we all live with today is a hub and spoke system. It's run by utilities, and it's a lot of large plants that have transmission and distribution lines that go through the countryside and distribute the power to wherever you are. The concept of distributed energy resources is that now, through advances in technology and reduction in cost, one can actually have a large number of nodes that aren't necessarily as big as a nuclear power plant. They're much smaller. And the node can be your smart thermostat, the node can be your car, the node can be the solar on the roof, the node can be something down the street. There are it's the battery in your closet. The nodes are many, many, many nodes. But conceptually, the more nodes there are, the more complexity there is to interconnect the nodes, because the nodes only work if they're literally and virtually connected. And over time, each of those are a new distributed energy resource. They're distributed because they're not out there at the edge of the network. They're distributed, they're wherever they are, and they are an energy resource. So that's what a distributed energy resource is.
Thank you, Jeff. Perfect. And perfect segue for Morgan O'Brien, who not only founded Anterix and is the executive chairman of their board, but also many years ago co-founded Nextel with Senator Warner of Virginia and chaired that company, which was the first all-digital nationwide wireless network in the United States. And Morgan's won all kinds of awards for that are too many to get into, but it has been said by experts that I respect very much that you cannot modernize the electric grid without modernizing telecommunications. And I think Morgan's vision for founding Anterix incorporates that concept. So Morgan, can you tell us a little bit more about Anterix and a little bit more about why you are so interested in transactive energy? And you are on mute, Morgan. Great.
How about that?
Perfect.
I think the right way to describe today's panel is not 4 leaders in this field, but 3 leaders in the field and a follower. And I claim the follower role because I've taken a 50-some year career in the wireless industry. And 10 years ago, I got together with some like-minded folks, and we decided to see if we could apply the advantages of next generation wireless that was taking over the consumer world, literally the world. We could take that and apply it to a very specific use case. And that use case is the utilities of the United States as they grapple with the requirements of clean energy and implementation of distributed generation, which poses a whole new set of communications requirements. The utility industry, since its foundation, has been using some forms of radio for many of their purposes, but they didn't have available to them, and this is what Anterix has done. Anterix acquired spectrum, a particular kind of spectrum, very well suited to the needs of the utility industry. Went to the FCC and got a tremendous vote of support from the FCC to take this spectrum, basically make it available for next generation grid purposes. And we have been now spending the last couple of years since the FCC made that decision, making our spectrum available to the nation's utilities. The one last point I will make is we couldn't be more aware of the challenges that rebanking the grid present. And transactive energy is just a fascinating topic to us about which we are learning as much as we can. But the part that motivates us is that for something like the vision of transactive energy to ultimately be realized, there will need to be a vast communications network supporting the electric utility industry so that literally millions of data points, which are the distributed energy inputs, whether it's batteries or whether it's vehicles or whether it's thermostats, but all those points can create virtually real-time situational awareness back to the utility grid. So we are so excited about the opportunity to take broadband technology, which each of us uses every day in his or her cell phone, and apply it to these special use cases.
Morgan, what you're basically doing for the utility industry is creating private LTE networks is that correct, that allow them to move huge amounts of data. But can you also talk about the need for secure transmission in addition to low latency?
Right, let me make, thank you, Glenn. Let me make an important distinction. The thing that makes your cell phone so powerful, your wireless device so powerful, is its interconnectedness with the internet. That as soon as you open it up and activate it, you are now part of and can access any part of the internet. Unfortunately, the downside of that is that you're also pretty accessible through the internet. So the challenge, as we see it for the utility industry, is harvest all the advantages of broadband technology, such as wireless devices do in commercial networks, but escape that risk that there is a vulnerability for all of these, as I described it before, millions of data points to be exposed in the internet. So private is the operative word there. That privately deploying these technologies so that there is an insulation from and a much higher level of security than a device that operates through the internet is the goal.
Thank you, Morgan. Larissa, you have, when I spoke to my dear friend Sherry Givens, who's the CEO of SEPA, she said that, and I said, who is your best expert on transactive energy? She identified you heading up chairing a working group within SEPA and also your own organization. Can you tell us a little bit more about General Microgrid and also what your attraction to this subject matter is?
And my work has really made this a very attractive subject. I am a lawyer, so I'm very immersed in relevant regulatory proceedings on these matters. And at General Microgrids, I am focusing on the commercialization of advanced microgrid capabilities. And so transactive energy is a very relevant subject. I also think microgrids can become very vital players in building transactive energy retail markets and making our electric power system value chain more transactive. And then add to that, like you said, SEPA work. I am leading a project to develop a white paper that evaluates what regulatory and market frameworks may be needed to enable the building of these transactive energy retail markets. I think based upon my involvement in regulatory venues and contributing to our electricity transitioning, I really strongly feel there is a need for transactive energy retail markets to address the, really sea changes we're experiencing in the electric energy sectors, the rapidly changing electric power market conditions, responding to new customer demands and distribution system network uses, to be able to provide grid operators, network providers, the necessary flexibility and the availability of resource diversity to meet our 21st century customer grid and society needs and objectives. And very importantly, also to incent continuous improvement and innovation. I'd have to say, in my view, transactive energy is a means for achieving cost effectively policy goals such as decarbonization, electrification, resilience, energy efficiency, by making marketplace opportunities first open to all customers and relating to broader and higher value applications of distributed energy resources, microgrid systems, virtual power plants, etc., while managing the associated market complexities and investment risks, and also supporting the transitioning from a static, our traditional legacy grid to a dynamic, interactive, modernized grid. So as was mentioned earlier, transactive energy would really enable the customers to become partners in the venture of modernizing our grid and operating it in a way that can advance our policy goals of the 21st century.
Thank you, Larissa. Can you just really quickly define what a microgrid is and how it fits into as a subset of transactive energy?
And it isn't so much a subset of transactive energy as a potential player, but it's a systems approach. And here, try to cough up the US DOE definition, but it really involves an interconnected set of multiple resources crossing, load, energy storage, distributed energy resources that can be managed both for the benefit of the customers and then through the point of common coupling, provide benefit services to the grid and operate in both grid interconnected mode as well as islanded from the grid. And it's that islanding capability that's been very relevant, of course, in a lot of the extreme weather events that we've experienced across the United States. Microgrids have been able to withstand these events and provide uninterrupted electricity. But what is also important, while a lot of emphasis has been placed on that, what is also important is the systems approaches of microgrids. I mean, we're really moving out of technology-specific deployment. We're looking at combinations, how these technologies can work together. And here within a microgrid, you get the balancing of supply and demand. You get the orchestration of these multiple assets and how they can work together to maximize outputs. And you get greater outputs through the systems approach than the traditional technology-specific approaches. So microgrids are a means for optimizing the resources that can provide a microgrid system, within the defined boundaries of a microgrid. Also, by the way, microgrids can be networked to increase their sharing capabilities and optimize resources over wider areas. And through this energy optimization, that's what can enable the microgrid not only to provide very efficient services and bring cost savings to those that are part of the microgrid system, buy into it, but also to provide very valuable benefits to the grid, the market, and to communities. So that's why they potentially could be a very big player, acting, as aggregators, virtual power plants, automation service providers through using transactive energy market mechanisms.
Thank you, Larissa. I'm going to come back to you in a couple of minutes to talk about cost effectiveness and education concepts and so on. But let's come back to Brian. You were beginning to explain and Jeff did as well, the multidirectional aspects now of our transition with transactive energy. And you use the term prosumers. Can you define it and elaborate on it and explain in just practical terms how this is going to make a huge difference in our field?
So I'd say it like this, which, all of us here, all of us listening to this, this discussion, we're all consumers. We consume an awful lot of stuff and we consume energy. And almost until today, that's how it has worked. We consume energy. Unless you work for a utility or an energy supplier, you don't create energy. But now we can, and now we are. And when we sell that energy, we then become prosumers. And so the real cool thing here is that you are looking at changing the dynamic, the 100-year-long relationship with the consumer and the utility company. That now the utility company can become a customer of mine while I'm still a customer of theirs. And it can become a very symbiotic and much more positive relationship where I can supply energy. We can all supply energy to the utility when they need it most. So peak hours, that type of thing, or the hottest days of the year where they need more energy. They can buy my power from my solar and my battery or from my car and put it up on the grid. And now I'm a prosumer. And even better, in some pilot programs that are working now, when you sell your energy to the grid, you don't just get a credit on your bill, your utility bill. In fact, they'll actually pay you cash. They'll send you a check at the end of the year for the energy that they bought. And so it really does change the dynamic. It changes how we think about not just energy, but who we work with energy. So your utility now is kind of partnering with you, adding value to your house, adding value to your community, while at the same time, by the way, you are adding value to the utility and actually helping to clean the air and clean the community at the same time, let alone give 100% power.
So in an era when two of the greatest problems for many, many consumers are, first of all, cost. I represent some municipal systems, attend public hearings, hear the heartbreaking stories of consumers that have to literally choose between whether they'll pay their electric bill or buy groceries or buy medical supplies and or pay for rent. And what you're describing is going to reduce costs for consumers and actually allow them to earn some money in the way you just described. But it's also going to make a huge difference in decarbonizing. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's really exciting. It's quite frankly, it's a three-fer. It allows us to decarbonize. It allows us to have energy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And make no mistake, we keep using more and more energy. So, the utilities, their biggest challenge is actually making sure they have enough power. And now they're looking to their customers and saying, can you help us with power? And then, of course, we have the climate solution. So it's a three-fer. It's really pretty exciting. And I'm going to repeat a fact. I'm not sure it's a real fact, but I'm going to repeat what I heard about the Ford F-150, the number one truck in the country. The battery in that has enough power in it to power the average American home for 7 days. And so, to Jeff's point, if it's sitting there in the parking lot, in your driveway, if it's, and you're not using it, why not sell some of that energy and actually pay off your truck? But why not sell off some of that energy so that it can go up onto the grid? It's really, and we're talking about trucks, we're talking about solar, but we haven't even tapped the surface of other products and, battery operating gadgets that we all have that could actually be played into this too. And
Brian, I think Larissa introduced a fourth benefit, and that is resilience. And we are seeing a tremendous increase in turbulent weather and wildfires, things that disrupt the traditional grid. And maybe I should just call on Larissa to expand on this issue a little bit more, and we'll need you to come off mute.
Yes. Well, that would be within the array of benefits that Transactive Energy could enable by, allowing a lot of different types of market players to come in and provide these kind of benefits to the grid. In terms of resilience, again, here, advanced technical capabilities of microgrids not only enable the islanding to allow, faster response, restoration by utility that goes down, but can also go give its benefits in proximity to surrounding communities to keep them afloat while the utility is recovering. And as I mentioned too, in this resilience, microgrids can be connected, network microgrids that can further enhance the resilience capabilities during these extreme weather events. And as I said, so far, the track record has been superb, whether it was, Northeast, remember Sandy, the crisis in Texas, and of course, all the events in California. And there they are really trying to beef up these microgrid capabilities to deal with these events. And also, in a way, you see, Transactive Energy would dovetail with using these kind of resources really when, how, and in the way they are needed. The timing of this is just very important because you can see what happened in Texas. The timing was way out of whack. Microgrids were ready to step in, could provide the resources, similarly in California and elsewhere. But yeah, this is a part of the array of the benefits that arise out of Transactive Energy, and the speed here by using prudently, carefully, the market mechanisms as distinctive from administrative programs. Administrative programs just were not able to kick in to tap into the right resources, although there are plentiful distributed resources within California. We're not able to really harness them, like I said, when, how, and where they were needed.
And Larissa, you have really tapped into probably a growing problem in the United States, where we have, first of all, we have huge population growth in certain areas. You mentioned Texas and California. We also we're not creating infrastructure quickly enough to really be prepared for the increased demand that is coming, that Jeff and Brian described. And we don't have even access to interconnection queues solved. So all of these problems, I think, are going to cause us to rely much more heavily on the types of distributed energy resources that you've been describing. I want to call on Jeff to kind of give us some insights.
Can I make just one point there before you leave? Because in terms of this infrastructure, I think we need to change the paradigm. As mentioned earlier, I think maybe was Jeff, and the need for a new regulatory paradigm. Because the one we have now does what you say, it's a grow and build out. And to be able to really meet and deal with uncontrolled, peak demands, et cetera. Whereas Transactive Energy would help us to better utilize what we have more efficiently and grow more prudently. So in meeting any population growth, et cetera, taking the burden actually off the grid and moving to a new paradigm where you're talking about greater energy efficiencies, doing more with less, that would be enabled. And in fact, Transactive Energy would bring, I think, load management in parity with bulk supplies in terms of balancing supply and demand. So a different paradigm it would bring in to more cost effectively meet our objectives and be able to integrate these resources and operate a modernized grid.
Thank you, Larissa. Jeff, I was going to ask you to give us some inside scoop from the investment side and financial side. How are what are the issues that big corporations are evaluating in terms of getting involved in the clean energy transition?
Thanks. So I was going to add to the last little set of comments to say that in the era of the creation of the prosumer, eBay is the first company, right? So eBay was the first company that said you can take what you have in your closet and sell it to the person next door without them knowing it came from you, right? We all had yard sales before eBay, but eBay has effectively democratized that element of commerce and allowed everyone to trade, and every individual is their own trader. And of course, it's radically successful, and there's much beyond that. So that's a good segue, because if this is all about the democratization of consumer choice, it's also about the democratization of corporate choice, right? Because as has been said, corporations are people too. So corporations have a voice, and they buy a lot, and they actually are very large consumers and users, and they have a large footprint. You know, in the 20th century, which some of us might long for, it was really easy, right? You needed power, you called the utility, and they just plugged you in. And if you needed more power, you called the utility, and they just gave you more power. Nowadays, if you want to add a bunch of trucks the electric trucks to your fleet, and you want to plug them into your facility and turn, metaphorically, your facility into your gas station, you just can't do that without a lot of cost and a whole bunch of time. If you call the utility and say you're going to plug a bunch of trucks in, they're going to tell you, well, it's going to triple your load. They're going to do a study. You're going to pay for the study. It's going to take a long time to upgrade the infrastructure. And then they're probably fresh out of electrons in your zip code for 3 to 7 years. So you have to stand in line. That's never happened in America before. So corporations are now at the forefront of starting to think about, how do they deal with that? Because as we, as a society, quote, electrify everything, where the electrification of everything in preponderant terms is largely about transportation, we need to not only have the capital to support the individual things like a truck or driving down the road, but you have to support that truck with all the infrastructure it needs. The reason that internal combustion engine trucks and cars work so well is because there's a lot of infrastructure around them. It might have alternative elements, but you can fill it up at the gas station. If something breaks down, there's a mechanic who you know how to get it fixed. The capital markets will lease you that vehicle because the capital markets are very confident about the residual values and all the maintenance costs for the entire life of it. And those costs and everything about that are very well known. So what's interesting in this front piece of generational change, of going to a transactive world, is businesses are not used to being involved in this element of choice. Most businesses, all businesses, have a day job. They have what they make or produce or consume or sell. They have their product or service. And generally, the energy that it takes to do that is secondary to them. It's not core to what they do. They rely on it, they use it, but it's not their core product. So they're used to just buying it and having it available to them. All of a sudden, they have the opportunity to change that, to create virtual power plants, to create microgrids, to create resilience, which, as Larissa says, they all want. But they have to do that in a way that's totally unfamiliar to them, because that change is both complex and requires a lot of capital. So the choices that businesses are making are about how do they do that in a way that is low risk and capital efficient to them, right? So as they get to the opportunity to talk about it, they're going to, just like many other businesses, they're going to need to be guided through it, and they're going to be benefited by having many of the elements done for them on a turnkey basis with partner firms, as opposed to having to do each element a la carte by themselves. Business is hard enough in their day job, so they need help managing that which is ancillary to their day job.
What are some of the obstacles for you that you've encountered, in addition to the ones you've mentioned, coming into Transactive Energy?
Well, everything is an obstacle. So the first obstacle is everything costs too much, right? So if you want to go out and buy an internal combustion engine, a truck, it might cost you, $100,000 to $150,000. If you want to buy the same scale electric truck, it'll cost you $350,000 to $450,000. Who wants to spend that much more money? Nobody. And yet when you analyze it and actually get down to the granular element of it, you can prove, as we do to our customers, that the effective cost is the same, right? The effective cost is the same, and that's at a unit basis. But that takes a lot of analysis and a lot of handholding. The good thing about the solar industry and what supported a lot of its growth is that there's a mark-to-market price, right? Everybody has electricity available to them, right? And then you say to them, hey, would you like some solar instead of some grid power? Generically, most people say, sure, but it's got to cost me the same or less as my grid power. And the price of grid power is very widely known and very easy to know. So it's a known quantity. By comparison, when you talk about everything we're collectively talking about in transactive energy, there isn't a reference price that's quite that simple, right? So what we have to do as an industry is make the pricing and the transaction and the contract structures just that easy as it used to be to buy electricity.
Thank you, Jeff. Morgan, you've been analyzing the role of distribution utilities as pivotal, or at least major players in transactive energy. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. Let me begin by saying the principle "do no harm" is constantly first and foremost for us, because the grid is a miraculous, incredibly complex, ongoing operation without which none of us can survive. So you can make every theoretical argument known to man about change, but every element of that change has to be considered carefully. Now, having said that, the sun, like today in Washington, D.C., is an amazing sunlight flooded day. So the amount of energy the supreme being is showering down upon us is huge. So the role that solar can play, if the economics and the regulatory and the customer familiarity processes, all of which are so complex, if those can be wrestled to the ground, we can move from what we have today, which is, I believe the number is only about 3% rooftop deployment of solar, to what the Department of Energy is hoping for at some point, not that far down the road, 2035, 40% of rooftop solar. I mean, that the process of figuring out whose capital, whose technology, what is the regulatory, what changes need to be made to the state regulatory process and the federal regulatory process. I mean, these are the things that make this such a fascinating study. And I do want to use this moment to plug, as a student of all this, that I've just been amazed by, is the role of the national laboratories. I mean, as a taxpayer, I never realized what a fantastic deal those national laboratories are. So I want to make sure I mention, and I think Denton's can make all of these studies available online. But there's one in particular I want to mention, which I have to read the title because it doesn't roll off the tongue. But it's the title of this study is "The Evolving U.S. Distribution System: Technologies, Architectures, Regulations for Realizing Transactive Energy Marketplace." But you would say, well, that's right at the heart of what we're trying to get at. And that's NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory report of 2020. And if you read it, it just lays out the challenges and the opportunities that we've been discussing today. The challenges are enormous because of the complexity of the system that has to be against which all this distributed energy has to be overlaid. And you can sit here and say it must happen. But then when you say, okay, here's how we're going to start, here's how it will start, I mean, that's where it gets difficult. So as I said at the outset, I'm a learner. At Terex, we're trying to learn, and we're much more likely to be servant than master in this. We see the wireless technologies poised and ready to assist in making two-way distributed generation an everyday phenomenon. And that's at the heart of transactive energy. But it will require a huge amount of capital and a huge amount of rethinking of what the U.S. policy towards delivering energy is.
You know, Morgan, we will take your reference to the National Labs report and put that on our website. But I'm so glad you mentioned our national labs. I think most people in the United States do not truly understand the value and importance. We have 17 national labs, and that gives us an advantage over any other country in the world. Nothing comes close to them. I recently went on the board of former Secretary Ernie Monet's Energy Futures Initiative Foundation, and they coordinate with the national labs all the time, and actually brought them in when they did the quadrennial energy review when Ernie was secretary. And it's astonishing the things I'm learning that they have done. For example, we all thought that horizontal drilling, directional drilling was strictly developed in the private sector, but it was really developed in large part and improved by the national labs, and then incrementally improved by the private sector. That's just one example. There are so many, but thank you very much for mentioning that. And when you're looking, did you have a comment, Jeff?
I was just going to add to this because I had the privilege of visiting NREL last week, and it is an exceptional place. I'm blessed to have been included personally, and not only do they produce these fabulous reports that Morgan's saying, but they actually talk, listen, interact, and so the background work is probably where some of it comes from. And then one example, which goes along with what you're saying, of something I saw. We're talking about transactive energy, and we're talking about the interaction between, what happens in a building and what happens on the road and what happens to a vehicle and all that. They've got a whole lab there where they're literally studying that simultaneity physically in the same huge room, where they've got everything to do with the vehicles and everything to do with the buildings and how they work and the power. And they're literally doing that research as we're sitting here on this call talking, and it's just so valuable to all of us. So yes, thank you, NREL.
And can I make one last point, which is that if conversations like this are to really produce results, there has to be an unbelievable education process in the United States about what not what everybody hears too much of, which is climate crisis and how we're moving towards incineration, but the reverse, the ability of technology to put the United States so far out and ahead of anybody else to solve a large part of the climate crisis by using distributed energy and non-polluting energy. It's not going to be easy. It requires a lot of change, okay? We'll have to get on with it. I mean, and I think that's what the national labs are doing. They're literally creating opportunities to see what is necessary to get peer-to-peer energy trading, to take it to the farthest extreme. What is necessary to make that work so that Clint doesn't have to worry about it when he's at the office. It's just all taking place in the background between all of the various generating and consuming elements of your life.
There's so many externalities that we just don't know that are going to come out of this. So, Morgan, I'm old enough also to remember the days of landline analog telephones, and I use them a lot. And I never thought that I could have a device that does what this little thing in my pocket does with data. And I think in those old days, like, all of the use was analog, and now all of the use is digital. And that which we do with it goes so far beyond anyone's imagination. So the phone and telephony is an example of what happens with the democratization of consumer choice, right? And in the electricity world, we're just at the forefront of it. We're just starting, which is.
But can I add this, that as an entrepreneur, you might expect me to say, "Hey, government, get out of the way, and we're gonna, the private sector will do all this." That's not the history of wireless at all. There was an informed and balanced relationship between the Federal Communications Commission, the Congress, the NTIA, all of these forces coming together. The result being that the United States did seize the lead and has by far and away the lead in wireless. And the same thing is going to happen here. I am sure of it. As I always say to the people who work with me, and when I have these opportunities to talk, if you think it's going to be easy, then you don't understand it.
Well, Morgan, if I can jump onto that, you had mentioned kind of a huge educational piece. And that's really where we have to start first. We're working on a program right now in Connecticut with Eversource, with Yale University, with the Connecticut Green Bank, funded by the Department of Energy, to actually engage people and to get them to actually buy solar plus battery kind of as the first step of TE. And the challenges we're seeing are fascinating because it goes back to just simple misunderstanding of how solar works. And then ultimately that battery storage is even available. So, and then what would you use your battery storage for? Today, residential battery storage is quite expensive. It's about $15,000, if not more, maybe $20,000 for the home. And almost to a person, our homeowners are saying, well, why would I buy that? I could get a much cheaper backup generator. And we have to say, this isn't just backup generation. This is generation. Actually, you're going to sell some of this power to the utility. In fact, the utility, that's the program. I mean, Eversource is actually buying it now, but it's as basic as that. And really, with battery storage, we are where we were with solar, just rooftop solar 15 or 20 years ago. There's no kind of real understanding of why we should have it, how it could work. And so we're really taking baby steps. And at the same time, the technology has come along dramatically. We just got to get everybody else there too.
I
So
just
glad
want to jump in if I could.
Yes,
okay.
Larissa.
From a different angle, because you have all these capabilities, everything here on the technological side, but the incentives are wrong in the legacy regulatory system. They're not working to trigger the right responses from these technological capabilities, as I said, when, where, and how the responses are needed. So I'll put in this, that to me, first of all, the transactive market mechanisms to me are needed to efficiently, reliable, coordinate, manage energy usage, investment and operational decisions. But I think that the greatest value really proposition here with transactive energy lies in providing, and this goes back to what Jeff was saying on reference pricing, universal access to a comprehensive, cost-effective, and efficient electricity pricing charging system, where the pricing charging is time differentiated with sufficient locational granularity and technology neutral, and that can incent price responsive market participation, drawing on all these capabilities, opportunities for all customers, large and small, and to act autonomously. It's this price-connected, decentralized market transactions affording local decision-making that can not only maximize the individual's welfare, but also at the same time that the electric system itself is moving toward price and quantity equilibrium to maximize total social welfare. This is totally missing in the electric markets today at the distribution level. We have to some extent at the bulk supply level, but that is not granular enough to really tap in and harness these resources at the distribution level. What we've got now, of course, are rate designs that are fragmented across the United States. But I do want to point out the groundbreaking work being done by the California Public Utility Commission and the California Energy Commission to break out of this proliferation of zillions of tariffs and move to this kind of efficient and comprehensive pricing system that gives universal access to all customers to come on, see what the prices are in very short time intervals so that they can gauge how to use their energy, how to plan their investment decision making, get returns on their investment, and importantly, utilize their investments in providing services to the grid at the times that are needed and where the responses are needed.
Larissa, you're raising some great points. I'm going to come back to you in a minute to talk a little bit more about how we're going to need to go about educating policymakers and regulators and even stakeholders. But Jeff, Morgan mentioned something about federal participation and how he welcomes it. Can you talk to us a little bit about the Inflation Reduction Act and how that is impacting your financial decision-making and opportunities?
Thanks for the question. So the Inflation Reduction Act is the broadest, most inspiring piece of legislation in energy because it touches everything, right? And it touches everything with market mechanisms that entrepreneurs, investors, companies, users, consumers can themselves use, right? So it's a framework and a set of structures that are broadly applicable. So it's legislation that largely works through both direct rebates, which is called direct pay, and through investment tax credits, and then is tailored to provide all kinds of incremental incentives for things that the government wants, but to help seed the way for investment to be made in every form of energy. And it's pretty broadly energy technology neutral in that it actually has lots and lots of pockets to support many, many types of energy, right? So it's broadly useful. It helps corporations tremendously, both in their energy transition, because it frankly works as a subsidy, and the subsidy allows more and more projects, more and more investments to be financially viable. The report card on everything is always the levelized cost of energy, and from a corporate point of view, the total cost of ownership. So if a company is going to buy any asset, they have to decide that it's a good buy. But the thing about it being a good buy is in the world of energy, the buy question is not just the initial asset purchase, but everything you spend on it over time. Obviously, if you're using a vehicle that's an internal combustion engine, you're buying diesel and you're having maintenance, et cetera. So in that example, you have different inputs. So the IRA helps to accelerate a lot of investment decision makings. And it's really the first broadly national policy in that way. When Morgan was doing telecom, and then there was the famous Telecom Act of 1996. One of the great things about that act is it was national, right? And the telecom industry was national. The thing about the energy environment we all live and operate in is it's very little is national. It's state by state by state, and we've chosen as a country through federalism to allow the states to control. But part of the regulatory issue is that's really causing things to slow down. And the final comment I'll make on that, Morgan, is that the federal government gets some things right and some things wrong. One of the things that fascinates me about the Telecom Act of 96 that they got wrong is they were very concerned about the forward utility of all that copper that we had in the ground. And they thought that all the copper would continue to be important for a long time. So there's some provisions of that act that really protected that. And of course, that hasn't been used at all in a couple of decades.
I'm so glad this is being recorded, Jeff, because I really hope that that last answer was historic. And you know, the Inflation Reduction Act, you mentioned that, first of all, it doesn't choose technologies. It allows all technologies to develop, which is a vital point. It also uses carrots in terms of monetary incentives and tax incentives. You talked about direct pay. What that means in a practical matter, if you look at the utility industry, at the electric industry, it's split up into, as an overgeneralization, into three categories: investor-owned utilities, which pay taxes, and that's maybe 70% of the industry, and then 30% that is electric cooperatives and municipal public power systems. The co-ops and municipals now get to also take advantage of these incentives, even though they are not tax-paying entities. And so that alone is a hugely important step. But the fact that it is carrots for everyone and doesn't attempt to solve the development issues strictly by policy, I think really is something we should take a hard look at going forward in terms of I'll be very anxious to see the impacts and the total investment of the Inflation Reduction Act.
It comes closer to being a market pricing mechanism. It's not quite that, but it's closer to that. It has elements of it, and it has very large and audacious goals. You know, and at the end of the day, some years from now, we'll look at it and we'll say, well, how much money was spent and how many electrons were just, you know, generated, and how many megawatts, et cetera, et cetera. So there will be a report card, which others, you know, will watch very closely.
And it'll be very soon. I mean, just under EPA, the Greenhouse Gas Fund is releasing $27 billion with a B just to do low to moderate income solar, or by and large, low to moderate income solar. And that money is going to be on the ground in the second quarter of 2024. So months from now. And then it's going to be, it has to be spent within 3 to 5 years. So like it's huge amounts of money going into this. Morgan had said, you know, we need huge amounts of money to start our transactive energy. And this is the start of it. This is where it's going, because rooftops across the country, we're going to go from 3 to 4% to 40%. And now the money is out there to do it.
Can I just jump in on low to moderate?
Yes.
Because this is another state federal thing that a lot of states are just getting wrong. And they're doing it by intentionally ending up charging low and moderate income people more for their power rather than less for the power. And the reason is if you want to build any plant, you have a lower unit cost if you build a bigger plant than a smaller plant. So by starting out by having low and moderate income offerings come from rooftop or small systems, you're intentionally disadvantaging the customers, the low and moderate income customers, because they have to buy from a more expensive power plant. What they should be doing is doing scale plants in the communities that are 50 or 100 megawatts, and allow those on a community solar basis to be sold to the low and moderate income customers. They don't want to do that because at a regulatory and a point of view, the utilities are still blocking that.
Well, Jeff, isn't it true that LMI homeowners, I mean, by and large, they're living in multifamily units, and that we can put larger amounts of solar on those than we could put on your house? And that's to your point.
Generally speaking, the amount you can put on a building is pretty small, even if it's an apartment building. And if you actually want to produce electricity for them, you have to do it on a field somewhere nearby or farther away.
But then when we add battery storage to that, it actually doesn't, it takes away that angst, doesn't it? Because
battery storage is fantastic and should be ubiquitous, and may the cost come down so it's a good unit cost.
And then we're in the business of transactive energy. And then even low to moderate income homeowners could be part of this process too.
Absolutely.
And Brian, you were talking about some of the short-term investment and monetary contribution that the IRA made. I think that experts believe that in the long term, it will induce several $trillion worth of investment, and we'll have to see how that plays out. But it is a just a major tectonic shift, and it probably gives us a fighting chance now to decarbonize at the rate we need.
It does very in a very real way, and you can actually see it's having an unbelievably positive impact from the utility sector too, because they're saying, wait a minute, there is money to do all this stuff. Like it's not that they don't want to modernize. It's not that they don't want to make more money or do better. It's simply it's an investment. But here is that investment, so they can now play along. And it's like, wow, we could actually we got federal money coming in. We have if you can go utility by utility and talk about how much money they're investing in transactive energy or VPPs, and it's all the kind of snowballing to this whole change of how we're all incredibly changing how we're going to buy and sell and use our energy and the type of energy we're buying and selling.
I'm going to come back to Larissa in a second, but just to give you forewarning, we'll have about 10 or 15 minutes left. I'm just going to ask each of you to sort of do a semi-lightning round and just convey the most important point or two that you would like for the audience to have on this subject as we start to close out. But Larissa, you have spent a lot of time considering how we should go about educating each segment of the folks that will be impacted by transactive energy. So not just the stakeholders, but also the regulators and the policymakers. Can you develop that thought a little bit?
Yes, and particularly the regulators, the policy decision makers, but I'll focus on the critical role that the utility regulators can play, because their actions, their decision-making affects such a wide range of stakeholders, and particularly now with all the different types of stakeholders that are investing in distributed energy resources, intelligent energy devices, etc. And there really is a lack of appreciation here, I think, by the utility regulators of the potential and the relevance of transactive energy now, because in undertaking this project with SEPA, I learned from like NARUC staff that most commissioners out there feel when they hear transactive energy, it sounds very fascinating to them, but they feel it is well down the horizon and not relevant to their current agenda. But the current agenda increasingly is involving these initiatives: decarbonization, electrification, resilience, energy efficiency, etc. And however, they're operating in the legacy regulatory paradigm that seeks to achieve the delivery of a homogeneous commodity. And the whole system is centralized command control. And they don't really understand here that this is a mechanism for value creation. And to be able to bring greater efficiencies into the process and make the delivery of reliability considerably more efficient in the face of trends where, as it was mentioned, there'll be an increase in need for electricity, particularly with respect to electric vehicles. So the educational process here is important, and the significance of undertaking demonstrations is just vital to be able to educate not only the regulators, but the stakeholders on these technological capabilities, how to really build the market capacity and the customer capacity to undertake transactive energy. Already, studies have been done, PNNL in their DSO plus T study. There's been, like I said, the TMIX Southern California Energy Pilot. There's been the Holy Cross Pilot. All of these are showing the significant benefits that can come out of transactive energy because it's geared to the optimization of energy, local energy at the distribution level that can bring down the burdens from the grid, increase overall utility asset utilization, bring down system costs overall to benefit all customers, defer, eliminate even costly capital-intensive investments of a traditional nature. And this is what, like I said, I'll go back to the CUPC, California Public Utility Commission. This is why they have launched this demand flexibility proceeding. They want to move out of time of use to dynamic pricing so that all customers can see the cost of reflective pricing in the marketplace and be able to respond accordingly in terms of their energy usage, their investment and operating decision-making. And I would urge parties to take a look at this TMIX Southern California pilot. It is just highly instructive to other jurisdictions because it evaluates the cost effectiveness of transactive energy models, and a particular one that they've now named CalFuse. And also, very importantly, it enables the comparison between the cost effectiveness of TE decision-making versus legacy command and control decision-making relating to producer and consumer investment and operational decisions. This pilot is a great, technical regulatory handshake because it not only evaluates the technical feasibility of mounting transactive energy features and a cost-reflective pricing scheme, but it also is very instructive on how to stage and design these kind of implementation project pilots, because these pilots can inform not only regulatory decision-making, but reforms to show us how to evolve from basic distributed energy resource grid integration to much higher levels, like, for example, going from a basic vehicle grid integration up the ladder to vehicle to grid integration. The market mechanism, transactive mechanism, is much more elastic, malleable, and can be staged and incremented, but evolve. I think these pilots are showing much better than utility administrative programs. Also, it's a chance to bring in actually the great work of labs, because you can bring in their technical assistance and evaluate the modeling and simulation tools they've been developing, as well as industry, to kind of validate the functions of these distributed level technologies and relate them to value streams that can be generated, and also evaluate how to quantify the net benefits. But as I said, this is a good technical regulatory handshake. Not only did this TMIX Southern California Edison pilot look at all these matters, it incorporated the regulatory aspects to evaluate the implications of the technical, the economic, in terms of needed regulatory reforms. And this means looking at what kind of regulatory innovations are going to be needed, like, for example, performance-based regulation for transitioning, also to evaluate the cost effectiveness of different approaches to rate design reform, and what kind of TE model systems and processes to use, and very importantly, how to evolve a uniform, consistent accounting system for distributed resources so they can be valued in a way where you can make comparisons, between alternative scenarios, like which types of DER will bring about more optimal results vis-a-vis one another, or between DER and conventional options. So usage and support of these pilots, I think, is integral to this whole process of education, and it is a learning process and can be beneficial across the board: the regulator, the utility, the industry partners, stakeholders, customers, in maturing through this, evolving with this, in building transactive energy retail markets.
Great answer, Larissa. Thank you. And before we start our lightning round, I did want to comment on a really important point I think that Jeff made earlier, and that is talking about our system of energy federalism, state federal jurisdiction. I once argued this issue up at the US Supreme Court on federal preemption. I actually got a favorable result, but my conclusion is that our current statutory structure for state federal jurisdiction now is just completely antiquated. And I'd love to see the Keystone Policy Center. I know that Christine had to leave, but I'll mention it to her. I would love to see them do a dialogue on the need to update state federal jurisdiction, because it's needed across the board, especially as we evolve into this new area of transactive energy. But let's start our lightning round. In order to make this work, you really just need to speak for a minute or so that everyone can have a chance to comment. And Brian, why don't we come back to you and let you get us started?
Well, I think the takeaway is really that everybody, each one of us, can be part of transactive energy. That's kind of the definition of it, that we all can be buying and selling our energy and change the entire dynamic. And so the game now is to actually get up to speed, figure out what you can do, where you can do it, whether it's your car, whether it's your home and getting solar, whether it's your business should have solar. We can be part of this. And so take that now and start understanding that the dynamic is changing between you and the utility and you. And the utility seems to know that. So let's get on top of that and be a part of it.
Just right, and beautifully succinct. Thank you. Brian, you can even yield some time to Morgan.
Sometimes he needs it.
With that admonition, I think we can all agree that this is the dawn of a new era, and the potential is vast. But in making that happen, we can either create better opportunities for the companies, the investor-owned utilities that are operating 70-80% of our current power delivery system, transmission delivery system. We can either go to war, which would be the worst thing we could do, or we can figure out ways to implement constructive change. And the great thing about these kind of conversations and Keystone and Denton's and the think tanks is we know what the risks and opportunities are. We just have to figure out a path forward.
Wonderful, powerful message, Morgan. Thank you. Jeff?
So I think we have a lot of agreement among this group. Efficient transactive energy is a gigaton opportunity, and we need gigaton opportunities in our realm. This is the moment of great generational change. And to be very clear, and the LPO, the Loan Program Office, has published reports on this, as has Bloomberg and others. If we do this well, we lower the generation requirement by about 20%. So as we need to increase our grid and as we're using more, it's better always to do more with less. And this actually, transactive energy well done, because it's trading, it reduces the demand for electrons. So it's absolutely critical. It is all about, however, the interface of the move from the 20th century grid, which is old and decrepit, to an electrification of energy of everything, which doubles demand or more. It's about democratization of consumer choice, which is really hard in a highly structured, regulated world. So we need a regulatory structure to support this, and it really doesn't exist. It really doesn't exist. State regulation is holding it back, and statutory change structure is antiquated. I totally agree with Morgan. We need to do this in a way to help them implement and be part of constructive change. The technologies are here, the capital's there to support it, but the structure is not there to support all the transactions and to enable them. So that's the hard problem we should be solving to get on with this gigaton opportunity.
Thank you, Jeff. And Larissa, you get to close us out. 1 quick minute of
Yes.
the most important point to convey to the audience.
I think that Transactive Energy, and particularly supported through well-designed, planned out, implemented demonstrations, can vitally educate the regulators and all the relevant stakeholders on how Transactive Energy can evolve us out of the 20th century, really top-down, build-out, asset development-oriented paradigm for the delivery of a homogeneous commodity to a new, I'd say, market-oriented, customer-driven, and data-driven regulatory paradigm to meet our 21st century objectives, and really to empower customers to become participatory in a exciting grid modernization process, and one in which they can actually contribute value. Transactive Energy, I think, in evolving even to date, is already exposing the barriers, the disincentives that are embedded in our legacy regulatory system. And Transactive Energy market mechanisms certainly would help to level the playing field for all resources and allow all customers, directly or indirectly, to participate in the market, to capture the value of these new resources that are just vitally needed to meet our new policy mandates and objectives, decarbonization, electrification, while also preserving the reliability, safety, affordability of the grid. But Transactive Energy moves in a different direction from our legacy system, which is all about grow and build out, whereas this is maximizing efficiencies and minimizing costs through value creation. And that's why I do agree it is a gigaton opportunity.
Great closing, Larissa. Thank you. I love the way that the four of you who come at this issue with utterly different stakeholder interests have found a way to make this a beautifully interactive discussion. So I'm going to give you a huge ovation on behalf of our audience.